Shalom Aleichem, and welcome back everyone as we are preparing for Parshat Tetzaveh. Parshat Tetzaveh deals primarily with the clothing, the special unique garments of the Kohanim, including the Kohen Gadol. And one of the garments was known as the Me'il. The Me'il was a long, four-cornered blue woolen robe. And at the bottom of this robe, Torah tells us there were bells. Yes, many, many bells. And the Torah says that the sound of the bells will be heard when the Kohen Gadol enters the sanctuary before Hashem. And it was very important that the bells be there. And our Chachamim tell us, we learned something very important from this. Chazal tell us that you never to enter a place without knocking. Our sages teach that one should not enter any home, even one's own, without knocking first. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai teaches that there are four things that Hashem hates, and one of them is a person who enters his home suddenly without knocking. So we learn here an important lesson of Derech Eretz, which is when you go somewhere, you knock first. You don't just enter, you always knock before entering. Beautiful, beautiful lesson of Derech Eretz. The question, though, is asked, the Kohen Gadol, the holiest man in the world, he's going into which room? The most holiest room in the world. He's going into the Kodesh HaKodashim. He's going in the Beit HaMikdash. He's going in the house of Hashem. Does Hashem really need bells? Does Hashem not know who's coming into the Mishkan? Doesn't know go into Beit HaMikdash? Why is the lesson of privacy, of knock before entering, being taught to us by the Kohen Gadol, the holiest man in the world, going into a very holy place where HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows he's coming? Why did Hashem choose to teach this lesson over him? And so the answer is both beautiful and simple. And the answer is because sometimes when people are on a spiritual high, when sometimes people are focused on getting spiritually closer to Hashem, they forget the small stuff. Knocking before entering, I'm doing the service of God. I got to go in and do it. No, even when you're up to such a point, even when you're doing such holiest of things, we can never forget the Derech Eretz, the proper way to act. That's what I said, Derech Eretz Kamal Torah. Before you can start the spiritual pursuit of Torah, which is incumbent upon everyone from the beginning, but there has to be Derech Eretz beforehand. You have to know how to behave. Right? There was a group of young scholars, the story goes, a group of young scholars that went to a yeshiva far away, and they came to learn by this great Chacham. And the Chacham welcomed them. And he started to speak to them at length about many topics. And they wanted to become his students. And each of them, this group of 5-6 boys who came, out of the 6, he accepted 5. And to the 6th student, he said, I'm not accepting you. And the 6th student said, why? He said, you've been with me for a couple of days. And I saw yesterday that when you washed your hands before coming to the table, you looked around and you couldn't find the towel. Instead, you wiped your hands on a coat that belonged to one of your friends because you were in a hurry to hear the words of Chokhmah at the table. You didn't want to miss them. But if you're a true Torah scholar, you would have understood this yourself, that you cannot forget simple decency. There's Derech Eretz Kamal Torah. I'm very sorry, young man, the Chacham said to him, but you have no place in my academy. Because we cannot get caught up with thinking that we're about to do a spiritual high, we're about to do something very important, something by Kedusha. We have to remember that Derech Eretz is always there. In fact, there was a young widow who came to Rav Shlomo Zalman, and she was very upset. She just lost her husband, and she wanted to do something big for her husband, something Leilu Nishmat, something to memorialize her dear husband. Maybe she can start a gemach. Maybe she could do something. And Rav Shlomo Zalman told her, after she finished speaking, and said, listen very carefully. I understand that you want to make a tikkun for your husband. You want to help him out. But this is my advice. If you want your husband to have an aliyah of his neshama, a tikkun for his soul, go out and buy some toys for your children. Go and take your children to the park and enjoy life with them. Forget the quest of great spiritual tikkun and help your children rejoice in life. And that will bring the biggest tikkun for your husband. Because we can't get lost in the spirituality of the matter and forget simple courtesy. We cannot do this. We have to remember that even in the holiest of places, Hashem wants us to remember to knock before entering, to remember simple courtesy, to remember the other person, and to help them. And this is why the lesson of knocking is given here in this context of the holiest man entering the Mishkan and the holiest of places. Moving on to our second lesson of this Parshat, we have a pasuk that tells us that when we light the candles of the menorah, you have to raise the flame, in which Rashi from the Talmud explains that Aharon should hold the light, the fire by the menorah, until the flame stands by itself. He has to create a complete independent flame that's not a flickering one before moving the light away. Right? And this is what we do on Hanukkah. Also, we try to light the candle, right? And once it's taken off, then we try to move the shamash to the next one. What is going on here? What is the lesson to be learned from here? There are many lessons, but we'll focus on one. There was a shul, an old shul, and they hired a new rabbi, and they came up to a certain part of the prayer, and half the shul stood up, and the other half sat down. And the one standing was screaming on the one sitting that they have to stand, and the one sitting was screaming those they have to sit, and everybody was fighting back to each other. So the rabbi was new to the shul. He said, listen, they cannot be fighting around. We have to find out what's the tradition. So he called the old men in the shul, and he asked them, what's the tradition? He said, is the tradition to stand? And the old man said, no. He said, is the tradition to sit? And the old man said, no. So the rabbi said, excuse me, so what's the tradition? Standing is not, sitting is not. And the old man said, the tradition is that we fight. Half sit, half stand, and we fight. And that is the tradition. It's an interesting story, but it's a very scary one. Because in this world that we live today, especially with social media, people just follow. People have herd mentality. Some influencer said something, someone said something like this, we all have to do it, we all have to follow it, we have to do a trend, whatever else is hashtagging and whatever it is. And they do this and everybody's following it. And everyone believes it. And people go to places that are questionable. People go to things and do things that are questionable, that are dangerous, that are hazardous. But they're doing it because they're following the trend. And the craziest part about this all is that even the observant Jews, even Orthodox Jews who we would assume are thinkers, right, are people who analyze, and yet they're also following cookie cutter, procedures. I saw brought down from Rabbi Rosenblatt. He says, how many times do we hear religious rabbis and teachers in Torah institutions who are more intent in creating zombies or robots who shuckle thrice daily and follow everything blindly instead of helping create thinking and organically growing individuals? He continues to write over here that our job has to be to create individuals who think. Rabbi Rosenblatt says, this pasuk tells us we have to raise the flame, meaning that when we pass the wisdom, the flame of wisdom, from one to the other, we have to create children who are independent thinkers. A child who's full of independence, someone who can take the thoughts and use them, and not just rely on their teacher at all times. In fact, Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch would say the job of a teacher is to make himself obsolete, to create a student who becomes an independent individual. Independent means independent to think, independent to question, to look, to ask, and to understand. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Tzaddik Lebrocham, he was asked about the rebellious Jewish youth. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe answered, and he said, rebellion is not a crime. The crime occurs when the rebellion has no healthy outlet. Rebellion, in fact, is a healthy thing. The child is being independent. He's thinking out the box. He has questions. It's a pure energy. And it's an energy that inspires a person to not give up. To not go along with an idea just because everyone else is thinking it, but rather to stop and think about it themselves. Unfortunately, that's the way of the world. If one person thinks, one person says, everybody follows. But we're supposed to create children who are independent thinkers. And obviously, the rebellious thoughts of a child need to be channeled properly. They need to be taught how to think. They need to be taught how to process, how to deal with intellectual issues. But the point is, we have to speak about sensitive issues, questions that come up. We have to talk about them. We have to address them. And we have to create independent thinkers. Obviously, we cannot stray from halacha, but we must learn how to deal with these issues and teach them how to do as much. For our last and final lesson in this week's Parsha, we know that the Me'il was, the Chachamim tell us, atoned for the sin of Lashon Hara. The Ben Shchai says that the pomegranates on the bottom, the bells that made the noise, they were made of zahav, they were made of gold. And he says the word zahav and the word kol, voice, Lashon Hara, has 3 letters. And he says because Lashon Hara kills 3 people, the speaker, the listener, and the one that Lashon Hara is about. And the Ben Shchai would share an amazing story in relation to this concept. There was a man who had 3 daughters. And unfortunately, his 3 daughters were not very nice people. One of them was a thief. The second was lazy. And the third girl, the worst of all, she spoke Lashon Hara, and she was a big complainer every single day. And he couldn't marry them off. Who wants to marry a thief, a lazy, and a person who speaks Lashon Hara? One day, a man came to him and said to him, listen, I have 3 boys, and I have trouble marrying them off. You have 3 girls. Let's get together. 1 boy for 1 girl. And the father of the girl realized he has no choice, so he marries them off. And the father-in-law of these girls, a very nice man, he decides, you know what? Not only am I going to marry them, get them married to my boys, I'm going to help them. And so for the thief, for the girl who was the thief, he got her everything she wanted. Everything that she ever desired, he bought and he got for her. Realizing that she has everything, she no longer needed to steal. So he cured her. For the lazy one, he got her maids, he got her servants. And so everything she needed to get done, she told them to do it, and it was done. So it wasn't a problem. But the third one was the hardest of them all. No matter how many times he tried to fix whatever issues and problems she had, there was always something new to complain about, some Lashon Hara to say. But he didn't give up. And every single morning he would come and ask his daughter-in-law, what's the problem? I'll help you. What's the issue? I'll do something for it. And it went like this every single day. One day, her father comes to visit her. And as soon as the father walks in, she says, "Daddy, you don't know what you did to me. You thought you got me married to one man, but I'm married to two. Every single day, his father comes in, he asks me questions, he tries to help me. Oh, my life is a disaster." Now, her father hears this and thinks, "Oh my gosh, my in-laws, he's stalking my daughter." And as soon as and then he sees, a few minutes later, his in-law is walking in through the door. And he walks over to his daughter and says, "How can I help you? What do you need?" And he says, "Wow, it's true. He's stalking her." And then his daughter starts screaming, "Get away from me. Leave me alone. Don't come closer to me." The father was in a rage. He was so upset. He took a knife and he stabbed his in-law. Not knowing to him that outside the door was this man's other son, one of the other boys. He hears the commotion inside. He runs in. He sees his father was stabbed. So he takes a knife and stabs this girl's father. And he's on the floor. In walks in the husband, sees that his father and her father are on the floor dead, says it's her fault, and he kills her. Says the Ben Ish Chai, this is just the mashal, it never happened. But the Ben Ish Chai says, this is how you see what Lashon Hara can do. It kills all three. And so, I know there are a lot of things going on in the community, and unfortunate events, tragic events, but the truth is nobody knows. I mean, there are people who know, but the majority of us don't know. And a lot of what we're speaking is most probably for sure Lashon Hara. I think it's important that we stay away from Lashon Hara, but we also bring up the issues and we talk about them, we discuss them, and how it's possible to prevent such things. And the community needs to look at itself and reassess where they are. And remember, the derech eretz always comes before everything else. No matter what spiritual high or spiritual pursuit a person is pursuing, a person always has to remember, derech eretz kamal Torah. The Torah was given only to people who have derech eretz. And b'zchut zeh, our community, we should all see only good news, and all of Klal Yisrael should see good news. Hostages should be returned. There should be peace in Eretz Yisrael. The levels of anti-Semitism need to reduce entirely. And b'zchut zeh, we should see Mashiach Tzidkenu, Meher B'Yameinu. Amen. Shabbat Shalom Lekulam.